Hello, hello, and welcome back to Call Your Coven. My name is Bee. I'm your resident numerologist, and my pronouns are she, her.
I'm Jeanna. I'm your resident astrologer, and my pronouns are also she, her.
And I'm Meg. I'm your resident tarot reader, and my pronouns are she, they.
And we are so excited to have our second conversation that was requested by a listener.
Yeah.
No, and I was thrilled. This came from a completely lovely and wonderful member of my Discord, the Astrology for Writers Discord. Link to that is in the show notes. And it was interesting because we've had a list of topics that we want to get to, but this question was so juicy that it went to the top of the queue. There was just no waiting on it. So I'm going to read what this lovely request is. Quote, I am loving these open conversations between the three of you. The theme I'd love to hear you talk about is building spiritual friendships and building spiritual community. How to navigate vulnerability, intimacy, and boundaries, how to navigate rupture and repair. I've done some reading and practice on how this works in political movement work, and I think there are similarities, but I'm curious how shared spiritual commitments can help this work, how doing spiritual community building can work for people who have trauma from religious community, and how to have healthy and respectful disagreements within the work that we do. So grateful for y'all's wisdom, etc., etc. A beautiful question, an enormous question that some of us had very strong reactions to initially, which we will talk about in a minute. So I think it's pretty clear that we can't get to every single nuance of that within an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, but there's so much to chew on, and I'm really excited to dig into it.
Yes, so obviously this is a huge question that contains a lot. And so in our conversation before we hit record about how much of this we wanted to tackle and kind of what angles we wanted to take, we wanted to kind of expand it to consider community in general and also looking at the more narrow subset of spiritual community. And so we're not going to be talking as much about political community or comparisons or through lines to political community in this particular conversation, because then we really would be here all day. So instead, we wanted to recommend a few writers, thinkers, bloggers, authors that might be helpful places for you to start. So I pulled 3 of my favorite books on this particular topic. They're all tarot-esque. So the first being 78 Acts of Liberation by Lane Smith. Cannot recommend this highly enough. Lane is an incredibly experienced and generous and well-spoken person with a long history of activism, and this is just a really, really cool resource to have. Tarot for the Hard Work by Marie Minnis. You can see all my little tabs in all these books. I also love this one. This focuses mainly on the archetypes of the major arcana, whereas 78 Acts of Liberation goes through all the cards. And I also want to give a shout out to Charlie Claire Burgess's Radical Tarot, which I just reach for every time I need a pep talk. So we'll also include some blog posts. Sari Jarrell Johnson particularly comes to mind in terms of building spiritual community. They just have a lot of really cool blog posts talking about this, particularly specifically like around conflict and around the intersection of political beliefs and spiritual beliefs. So we're going to drop a bunch of juicy things in the show notes. But yeah, hopefully that gives you a place to start if you want to be thinking about the integration of the political and the spiritual as well as community. That's a lot to, it's a big topic. It's a big Venn diagram.
It's a big topic. I also want to explicitly shout out the forthcoming Queer Devotion from Charlie Claire Burgess. Meg and I both, who wrote Radical Tarot that Meg just shared, and Meg and I both blurbed it, I think.
And I love it so much.
I think I blurbed it as well.
Yeah.
Charlie Claire Burgess, friend of the podcast.
Yes.
We love them and their work, and they had a really, it's just a very, very solid look at bringing a queer politic to spiritual, to also recontextualizing queer history and spiritual history. And so it's very cool. Anyway,
Very cool.
So shout out to all of them. Lots of resources for folks to get going with. So by way of bringing us into this question of what is spiritual community, how do you build it, how do you navigate it, I think talking about some of our initial reactions to this question, and I'm specifically vulnerably volunteering my own to kick us off, because I need to clarify, because people in my Discord know who asked this. I love this person. They are wonderful. I had such a knee-jerk reaction against the question. Not against it being a good question, a thoughtful question, but even though this was asked in a literal spiritual community that I cultivate and like manage and moderate, I was like, I don't know anything about spiritual community. Like, I've never been part of a tradition. I've never been like a pastor or a priest. I've not been initiated into different lineages that like some of my friends have been initiated into. I was never part, like, we call ourselves a coven, but I've never been part of like a traditional coven that has rites and initiations and that kind of thing. And I got honestly like very Saturn with the question. I got very rigorously hierarchical, if you will, and I think that says a lot about me and my trauma, and about how loaded this question can be, and this concept even can be, even for those of us who have been in, non-traditional, not religious, spiritual spaces for a long time.
It makes sense to me as a reaction why that would be where you went at first. My initial reaction was thinking about both the spiritual spaces. All of us run Discord communities that are talking about spiritual ideas and are linked to our own newsletters and our own work and our own lenses. So that's one kind of spiritual community. But the other thing I thought about was just my friendships with fellow practitioners. Most who run their own businesses and are practitioners in their own right, and are experts in their own fields, as well as just people who are really deeply curious or might offer readings or whatever. A lot of the people I'm in spiritual community with, what I would consider spiritual community with, are also professionals in one realm or another. And so I kind of thought about both of those things rather than thinking about something more religious or ceremonial or something that required an initiation or had regular meetups or new moon circles or anything like that. Because I've also never been part of that. I mean, we certainly all went to church. But yeah, my knee-jerk reaction was actually more thinking about digital community as well as my non-professional but still kind of overlapping with professional friendships, where we talk about the spiritual, but we also talk about our business and we also talk about our lives, and it's all kind of, and of course we talk about politics too, and like all of these different things kind of living in one soup, as B likes to say. So
Yeah, well, thank you both for sharing. And I know that, yeah, it's vulnerable to say like, oh, I didn't want to do this and here we're going to do it anyway.
I sat with it. I talked myself down. I thought about why I had the knee-jerk reaction, but yeah.
Yeah, but I think the knee-jerk reactions are important, especially in something that is quite complex and nuanced. And the first thing that I thought about, honestly, was even just the word community as something that does get thrown around a lot. And especially with Meg, like you were saying, online or digital spaces, I think I've had this conversation with other spiritual practitioners before about like, what do we mean when we say that we're part of an online or a digital community? Like, how then are we showing up for each other in times of need or getting through people through it? And like, if your community just doesn't show up or falls apart when the going gets tough, then I don't know that is something you can really label a community. So I appreciated how much of this question was really about navigating rupture and repair and how to have long-lasting, trustful relationships within community. Because I agree, I think a lot of them are online now, and that just adds its own flavor to it. Yeah, well, I guess, and I'm happy to go first, but I guess I think it might be nice to just start off with defining that term or the term spiritual community and for each of us and like what it means.
Yeah, I mean, I love a definition. I also love a definition just as a jumping off, just as a starting point, just to be like, this can't, like you both have said, this is such a big topic. It's so complex. It's so nuanced. I don't know that any of us could put a concrete definition to even what our understanding of it is, but in as much as we can give some rails to what we mean. I mean, to me, a spiritual community is different than a community that is spiritual. I suppose. And I think part of where my initial reaction came from is because to me, like Meg was saying, I mean, obviously we're friends with B, we're friends with so many other practitioners here in New York. So we've taken those digital relationships, offline. I think we see Maeg Keane, for example, almost every week. Just to share one, and there is such, I think, a very messy space where it's like, is that because we're in spiritual community with them, or is it just because we're friends and we happen to share, kind of to the political aspect too, and like our friendship has thrived in a shared sense of values, of what spirituality is, of the politics that can accompany that, of how we live our lives. Anyway, that's very far afield. Spiritual community, just very simply a group of people who are in regular committed relationship that that, like B said, can withstand conflict for a period of time. And I think of a spiritual community as like the primary impetus of it is a shared spiritual value or belief, as opposed to a group of people who are friends and who also have varying spiritual interests. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. I think when I think about community, spiritual or otherwise, I think the first thing that really comes to my mind is the intentionality piece. I wrote an essay about how community can sometimes get conflated with just like friendship. Like you were saying, Jeanna, that like people seek community because they actually want friends. And that's fine. It's okay to want friends and it's okay to be in community with people you're also friends with. But I don't think they're the same thing. I think that community has a really intentional vibe to it that is like, I'm going to be vulnerable with you. I'm going to tell you what I need. And I'm also going to show up prepared to give every time I'm in this space, whether it's a digital space or an in-person space. There is a willingness to give and receive that has to be in equal measure or more on the side of giving. And I think that when those principles are applied to friendship, it doesn't feel the same way. It's like, I don't want to be friends with someone where I'm always the one who's giving. But if we enter into a community space, or we say, I want to be in community with this group of people, or I want to be part of this community, but we're only looking for what we can extract or thinking about what it's going to offer to us, it stops being a community thing and it starts being about something else. And that's a hard thing to say concisely, but I think that that for me is something that always comes up when I think about the differences between community and friendship, or I think about what makes community actually sustainable and able to weather disruptions or disagreements. For me, it's less, I think there have to be some base shared values, absolutely. And in this essay, I shared a definition to community that's really about people that we have chosen to humanize, people that we are willing to see as flawed individuals that we still want to be connected with and caring for. But yeah, it has to include that here's what I'm bringing to the table, here's what I'm willing to offer, here's what I want to give element to it, or it falls apart.
The friendship aspect of it, I've never considered that before, like friendship versus community. So I'm already so grateful for this conversation. But that makes me think that in terms of some kind of community definition, yes, strangers play a part. And I don't know that I've ever thought about it like that either, because if you're stepping into a communal space, you might not know everyone that's going to be there or be a part of it, or especially like in a Discord that any of us run or otherwise. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of strangers in there. And so you are showing up with an open heart and a vulnerable, generous spirit every time you show up to offer something. And also then with this boundaries piece and like navigating the intimacy of that, I think you do also have to remind yourself that these are strangers. I don't know all of these people. I don't know what's that word, sonder, like the idea that everyone has a full life, that you just like you, but you know nothing about their full life. And so there are elements of respect and being considerate and conscientious, that are, again, all of these offerings to a space. But I think the stranger aspect of community is really interesting.
Yeah. I think that's a really useful delineation too, Meg. And in that sense, it actually is very fitting, I think, that I cited our friend Maeg Keane, because we are both very good friends and also deeply in community with Meg and their spouse.
Mhm.
And but I absolutely have friendships where it's not as much in community, you know? Like it's I mean, and there are different tiers of friendship. Like not everyone needs to be your closest, most intimate bestie who you know, are with and doing things for every day. But yeah, I think that's a very useful thing to keep in mind, that you're most of us probably are not going to be in community with, in that sense of like you know, I think of how many friends are many of our dear friends are surprised when Meg cooks meals for them, like when they're really sick, or like when both of them are sick, and like we'll bring food and they are shocked that you know, and it's like, but this is what that is. But this
Yeah.
is, you're our people. Like this is what we do. You know, you're sick, we bring you. We walk a few blocks, we bring you food. But we have really, a lot of our relationships, I think, that were, not to say like just friendships, but that were large. You know, that were fun and lovely. But like a lot of those have gotten a lot less attention in favor of investing in the relationships with people who it's like the world is ending and we want to hunker down together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that is so key to that, and not to just harp on the hard shit, but like I do think that when the hard stuff happens, it becomes very clear.
Yo.
Relationships become very clear. Like
Yep.
this is solid and so maybe surprising, you know, oh wow,
Mhm.
that person really showed up and I wasn't expecting that. Okay, cool.
Mhm.
And so, just as somebody currently going through a lot of hardship and realizing what community actually looks like in my life, I'll just share like, I'm not in a spiritual community, and I don't know that I have been since I left the church. I don't think that's been something that I've been interested in. You know, I've never found like a non-denominational, or they have all of these little churches that are like, oh, we're
Like,
yeah, like we're
yeah.
queer, we're
We're
cool, we're
cool.
progressive, and like that
Yeah.
just isn't interesting to me. And
Mhm.
then in terms of like covens or groups, like I really do consider myself to be kind of eclectic. I think the closest to spiritual community that I've come in the past is like going to a place to take classes or going to meditation centers, and then you know you're a member there, or and you're taking classes with some of the same people. But again, I don't know that that's really spiritual community, because I'm not showing up for any of those people, they're not showing up for me, we're just like
Mhm.
holding space while we have the experience.
It's
Yeah.
very notable to me that like churches, synagogues, mosques, places of worship, like sacred places, that are public sacred places, and higher ed live in the same part of the birth chart. So,
Whoa,
Yes.
yeah.
interesting.
So I think
Well,
that's
yeah.
interesting that you say that like classes and education and this other kind of,
Mhm.
the other end of Jupiterian spiritual belief is like is intellect, is the life of the mind and the life of spirit.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting that you're bringing that up.
Yeah, because like academic community for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah.
I think my spiritual community right now is literally in our discords. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
like
Yeah, me
Gina,
too.
you've created such a beautiful space, and we've seen mutual aid channels pop up, and we've seen people
Across all of
sharing,
our discords, that yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
and we've seen
Yeah.
people sharing resources and getting really vulnerable in the light a candle or some kind of
Mhm.
spiritual,
Yeah.
what's prayer request adjacent that
Yeah.
everybody likes, send me some vibes. And so I think that the ways in which I've seen people show up for me online, where again, we share spiritual beliefs or tools or witchy modalities, whatever you want to say, has been so beautiful and has really been so bolstering in a real way to know that, like, yeah, we might have met online, but now there are physical candles being lit all over the country for me right now
Yeah.
for this event that I'm going to have. And like,
Yeah.
I'm going to get emotional talking about it, because it's like, how fucking gorgeous is that, that then I feel like there has to be some kind of tangible aspect to community. And that exists even if you're never going to be in the same room with someone. So I'm definitely not saying IRL community. I'm actually saying the opposite, you know?
Yeah, truly.
No, and I think digital stuff is so useful. Just sorry to interrupt you here, B, but like I think it's so useful to I absolutely think of digital spaces as spiritual communities. Also because literally like when we say that, it's also like we believe that things are made manifest out of belief and this kind of spiritual collective action. And there is such a togetherness that we can find with like-hearted, like-minded people who may not be where we live individually. Like it so happens that all of us live in the two largest cities in the United States where there are definitely a lot of other people who like we could IRL do this with. But like where I grew up, like it's a town of 1,000 people who most everyone went to church. Like I'm not going to find like a group of 100 symbol, you know. So I think that the internet truly does offer so much connectivity to so many people who could not take part in this kind of community IRL.
Yeah. Yeah. My last thought too is I also consider creative spaces to be spiritual communities too. And like, you know, just to keep that definition of spiritual kind of broad as well. And yeah, I mean, just 2 days ago, I got an email. I don't even know how anyone got this email, which it's a fandom email, so it's fine. But like in my brain, I'm like, how did you even get this? 5 women that I've known online for a few years literally banded together and pooled money and sent me a DoorDash gift card from my fandom aunties. And I was like, I literally cried. I was like, what? Like, you would all do that? Like, all of these women who, like, yeah, okay, we've shared space. I know. I was like, yeah, we've shared space. We've shared creative ideas. We've shared community. You know, we've all screamed about the same things for years and years and years and like hyped up each other's creative work. But truly, like the people that have come forward to be like, no, you are actually a human, you know, what we choose to humanize, like you're actually a human on the other end of this computer and you're going through a really tough time and there's nothing that I can do, but hey, we can still band together and like make sure you don't have to cook tonight. And
make
that
sure you're fed. Like,
Yeah.
gorgy. So I think spiritual community, even though I don't consider myself to be a part of traditional ones, I think for me right now, it's really important to acknowledge that I actually do feel a part of spiritual community and I feel very held and supported and bolstered by those that I have offered relationship to over the last however many years. Because it is a give and take. Obviously, I've done something to then receive those gifts. So I think it's so important.
I hate that this is what's coming to mind.
Do it.
Like, there's a verse that's coming to a Bible verse that's coming to mind over and over again in this sense of like who is community, you know, like who can you do this with? And it truly is you shall know them by their fruits. Like you shall know them by their fruits, which is said in scripture to indicate like Christ likeness or whatever. But like in our context, it really is the question, like you're saying, you know, you and your wife are going through just a fucking trial and a tribulation and like a fucking book of Revelation situation over here. And the question is truly who shows up? Like not just who wants to occasionally gossip about industry stuff with you, not just like who's like kind of a lifelong friend, but like casual, you know, like we just have stayed in orbit, but like who is boots on the ground? Like, yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Who can hang? Yeah.
Yeah, and who do all the things. We've talked about this before, but it's like I don't know when we decided that we like didn't drive people to the airport or didn't help each other move. It's like that's literally what we're on this planet to
like
do.
that's literally all of it. Like the lighting the candles, the saying the mantras or prayers or whatever you call it, the helping people move, the helping people find an apartment or a place to live, the like, let's garden together, let's go pick up trash together, let's go to this community meeting together, let's do some volunteer work together, let me drive you to the airport, let me pick you up, let's go grocery shopping together. Like that shit is community building. Like it is like the do life together. Like that's what that is, you know? It's not just let's only hang out when it's social and fun and we have an activity. It's like no, I want to see you in the day to day. I want to bring you soup when you don't feel good. I want to pick things up for you when you need them. I want to spot you $5 when you need it. Or, it's like, it's all those small things that add up into something really real. And I think in spiritual community, that does very much look like, let me light the candle. Let me send you this book that I had that I picked up that I thought of you. Let's talk about where we disagree on what this looks like and actually do so in a respectful way because we care enough to call each other out or call each other in or talk about the hard things. Like, it's all part of it.
Yeah, I love that, Meg. I also think there's kind of a what you were saying about with like let's talk about the hard things, but you articulated I think one big group of that, which is like, okay, there's an issue. Like,
You gotta name
okay,
it first.
something has come up, like we got to talk about this. But I also think of with like the question, and this may not be what this individual meant with the question, but I also think of like, okay, especially in spiritual communities that like B was saying, people are more eclectic. Like we're not part of a specific tradition or a specific, like we're not part of like a lineage in Ifa, for example, like where there are kind of agreed upon rituals and beliefs and all of that. Like we're a lot of us are very much solo practitioners. A lot of us are very eclectic or syncretic. And so within that soup of a lot of different ideas, how do you just navigate like differences of belief, like differences of opinion or belief within a spiritual community where it's not like someone may not be living in their values in a way that like brings harm to other people, but it's like we actually really disagree about a certain topic, and how do we navigate that, especially as people, at least speaking for Meg and myself, like coming out of really orthodox religious traditions where disagreement, like doubt, disagreement, there's no space for that. There's no space for doctrinal deviance, as it were.
That's what I was thinking about was we are not safe to have disagreements. We are not safe to speak out against. We are not safe to question because then, yeah, you have no idea. I mean, I'll just shout out conflict is not abuse. Like, I just think that we don't have a nice culture around weathering storms or having disagreements and conflict and coming out repaired. That's just beyond religion. Like culturally, we just like we don't know how to do that. But I do think that, yeah, that fear of like, if I say something, that will be the rupture. And how will we all get back from that? And that is vulnerable. That is intimate. That is uncertainty. Yeah, there's always a chance that that could happen, that we're not going to be able to repair or find common ground or move forward. But I do think it is really important. I mean, honestly, what's coming to mind is for us to like we've had to weather some things. We've had to repair.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah, I mean that just totally came to mind. Like
pretty early too.
Pretty early. And we haven't had any issues since we've gotten the show up and running. And I think obviously getting something up and running is difficult in and of itself.
More than half the battle.
Yeah.
75% of the battle.
Totally. And then we were all kind of weathering different like personal situations. And yeah, we had to like have a Zoom and hash some things out.
We had to hash some things out. And I think some of us, me, were more like very like, this is how it is, and this is how I am, and than others. And luckily, like, I think Megan, and I especially think that Meg and Stacy, B's wife, are like we're gonna handle it. Like, we're gonna get.
Well, stop crying. I was like, okay, we can talk about this. I cry when I'm upset, and it makes me so mad because I can't talk. I'm just like, I just have to cry for 5 minutes, and then I can have a conversation.
But yeah, like, we had a really big conflict about, incidentally, values and priorities, and is how that could be summarized, and had like some really intense discord back and forth, and then got on a Zoom and cried it out, and
but I think in that there's like a willingness to stay in it. Like, is a really important piece of repair, I think, is not leaving the conversation, is saying like, okay, this is really mucky, but and maybe we don't see the other side, or we don't see how we're all going to come together and smooth things out, but like we're here until we figure it out.
Yeah.
Totally. Well, and I think part of it for us, like without getting too in the weeds, but it was very like miscommunications and assumptions being made about things that were said and things that were not said,
Would
which
say it made a bad novel plot because it's like
terrible.
literally
It's literally one of those
conversation.
just have a conversation and the thing will be fine. And truly it was like we literally just had a conversation and we're like, oh, this was the disconnect. You said this, I heard this, this was the truth somewhere in here, and we just had to move the pieces around and figure it out. But yeah, there were so many moments in that series of things that led to that kind of climax of that anyone could have bailed at any time and we wouldn't have gotten there, and then this thing wouldn't exist anymore. or worse, like the friendship might have not recovered, you know, because we were friends first, which is why we wanted to do this project in the first place. And so I think, yeah, thinking about that as like there were so many moments where someone could have said, I don't want to talk about this, or I'm actually just out, I don't want to deal with this, I'm not willing to do the hard parts. But we all wanted to do the hard parts, and I'm including Stacy in that as well. Like we all wanted to figure it out, we all wanted to know what was going on, and we all wanted this thing to happen, which meant that we had to put in the hard, uncomfortable, deeply vulnerable and scary work of having the hard conversations and then being like, oh yeah, okay.
Well, and the friendship stranger piece is now really interesting to me, because if you're talking about like a broader community, if you have a disagreement with someone, or I'm just going to use Discord again as an example. Like maybe the hard work for you is like not saying something to someone that you disagree with, because it's not actually like, some of it might be chalked up to mind your own business. But like if you don't have a friendship with that person, or there isn't a reason that you would want to stay in something hard and actually do the work of repair, then yeah, it is a different, it's a different thing to say, because I'm in community with this person, because I want to stay here and I want it to be nice for everyone, like I'm going to see this through. Or even, you know, I'm going to try and see the other side of it, or I'm going to self-reflect and see my own tendencies to handle things one way or another and then make a different decision. I just think there's so much that goes into it.
And not to like be like, I'm going to talk about my Discord, but both of you have mentioned, I think at least one of you mentioned in this episode already, that you feel like my Discord is a really safe place, on one of the safest places that you have online. And that is something that has been told to me by many people, some of whom I'm friends with who are in the Discord, and some of whom I don't know from Adam, but are like, this feels safe. And I think a really big reason that is because I have very clear rules / boundaries about this is how the conduct is in this space. And obviously, again, this doesn't necessarily apply to like a one-on-one friendship, like, and such, but there are very clear rules at the outset. And I take managing that community really seriously. And so I have gently called people out in like when certain things are said that I'm like, we don't do that here, you know? And some folks respond to that really beautifully and then continue to like check in. They're like, hey, like you've mentioned, you know, I'm very anti the use of generative AI. I've written a whole essay about it. And so some folks will like message me before, like being like, hey, can I post this link with this thing about AI? I'm like, oh my God, yeah, it's like a news item of course, post it. Like you're not promoting the use of like AI in this thing. And some people respond to that like really beautifully. And they're like, oh, I didn't know that about this space. Like I will, you know, adjust accordingly. But then some folks like when I've called out for things as simple as like not saying thank you when they're constant to the point about being in community is give. And some people just kind of want to take. And like gentle reminders to say thank you literally led to someone very dramatically exiting the Discord. And I think that folks seeing that this is a space where when people say off the rails shit, it will get addressed, it will get clarified. I think that really helps in that kind of what you were talking about with like community, like these aren't just my friends, these are a lot of strangers. I think that helps folks really, again, understand like, oh, this is how to behave here. That doesn't really sound sexy, but like every space has its rules, and we know the rules of different spaces. And in spiritual spaces, like there are varying rules depending on the shared beliefs of the people involved. So,
No, but I
Yeah.
think that that's such a good point because yeah, I think maybe and maybe we should have said this earlier, but I do think that it's interesting to note that we are all coming to this conversation and we are all speaking through the lens of people who some might describe as community leaders or people who are responsible for moderating and containing and guarding. And it also means that we have a unique role within those communities, the ones that we're talking about, at least our shared discords that we each manage, where we are responsible for enforcing those boundaries. And not every community space is necessarily going to have like a designated leader or a mod, especially if it's not digital. A lot of spaces do, or a lot of spaces have like the folks who initially started it, the founders or the facilitators or the hosts or whatever, who might also take on that role. But I think something that's really interesting in thinking about community in general, but spiritual community specifically, is yeah, that everyone is signing up to follow those rules or is collaboratively building those rules that safeguard that space together. And how everyone's going to do that is going to be different. And the rules or, boundaries or methods of caretaking are going to be different for every space. And a lot of times those are going to grow and evolve over time. When I first made the Discord space, I didn't have any rules about AI because I didn't think it was going to show up in the space. And then when it started showing up in the space, I had to address it. And I had some folks who were very fine with it and we had some great conversations. And I had some folks who fully just noped out of the space because it wasn't a rule that they wanted to follow. And that's fine, like no ill will, like it's not a space for them and that's fine. But I'm like, I had to set a rule based on what I was comfortable with and my books getting pirated and all of these things. And that's where we landed. So, but I do think that that's an interesting lens to keep in mind as we're having this conversation, that we are fulfilling those rules in different ways. Like, I don't have to be a moderator when I'm in Gina's space or in B's space, but I do have to serve as a moderator in my own. And I also then have to make decisions about how much of each thing I'm going to engage in, if that makes sense. Like if a conversation is going on, I have to kind of decide, okay, as the person who's moderating the space or facilitating the space, do I want to let this conversation happen without me? Or does my voice add extra weight if I chime in? Will that continue the conversation or will that shut it down? And just as one example of this, something that happens in my Discord, which is smaller and a little slower moving than Gina's, but has a lot of really incredible people in it that are very vulnerable and tender with each other, and I love it very much. This kind of bi-weekly video chat meetup sprung up very organically. It had absolutely nothing to do with me. It was just a group of people in there that wanted to start doing it together. And I have very intentionally only gone to one of those meetups. I didn't go to the first or second or third one, and I haven't gone back, not because it's not a great space, but because I know that me showing up changes the dynamic of that community space. I'll probably show up again at some point. I always say, have a great time, like enjoy this, whatever. Missed y'all today, but it's a choice for me to not go as often because I know that as the facilitator of the space, it might shift what the conversation becomes if I'm there. And I want people to have community building on their own that doesn't revolve around me or like shift things over to me in that way, since it's my space. So yeah. I just wanted to talk about that.
No, I think that's super great. And I think that something you said, Meg, is around some people were like, cool, we'll engage with this conversation. And other people were like, not for me. Like, bye for now, like all good, is around presumed shared values within a space and how much that operates within both community and friendship, especially of like a spiritual variety. And again, with what B was saying earlier about how conflict averse US culture is generally, I cried when you were talking about the fandom thing, B. Like I've been in I'm less involved these days. I still I read fanfic, I look at fan art. I'm not as deeply involved. Like I used to be in my late teens, early 20s. I was deeply involved in fandom. And inevitably, because people are people, conflict comes up. And people are going to go at it or are going to have different ideas or different interpretations or different beliefs. And some people are going to feel real, real strong. And when you don't have rails, like when you don't have, and in an online community, that can look like having rules. Like a lot of the biggest discords that I'm in, that I'm very like very much a lurker, they have a lot of rules that you have to opt into before you can even look in the channels. That's how you keep a group together. It's like we have to have a central group of tenets that we reasonably agree
Yeah.
on, that this is how we will behave.
And especially when it comes to like the religious community versus spiritual community building, I think that a lot of the tenets of community are just there no matter what kind of community it is. And so guidelines are important, like codes of conduct are important. And so that is what I was getting to way back with the stranger stuff of like, you might just have to be respectful and conscientious and like, sorry, that's just what you have to do to be in community with people.
Yeah.
You know? But I think the spiritual space where it doesn't work quite like the online space is that unmoderated vibe because it's like, that's why I consider creativity to be under this umbrella as well, is because I think it's communities where part of your identity and part of your value, what you stand for, what you believe in, like you are very attached to how you show up in space. And so it's way different to like let people have their beliefs in shared spiritual community spaces and not take it personally, not have to change yourself to match someone else. Like, I do think it takes a lot of self-autonomy and self-authority to show up in a healthy community space. And no vibes, or all vibes, no points. But I just, it's a really sticky space, I think, because we bring so much of ourselves to it. Yeah, what about IRL spaces, like spiritual community? What would that even look like for
That's
either
the
of you?
point. That's the point where I think I get sticky, because if we're keeping it digital, that's very clear to me. But I've been a solo practitioner, like pretty much since I started getting into all this. And these days, like I was saying earlier, we have IRL friends who we are in community with, who are also practitioners. You are an IRL friend. You live in
Yeah.
LA, but you are an IRL friend.
We have spent time together in person.
In real
You do
time
that.
together.
The
Many
podcast
times.
itself was birthed through an IRL. I mean, I know that you
Yeah.
wanted to pitch it to us, B, but like you did it in person. I think that's
Yeah.
really meaningful. Like that you did it like when we were, because there's also just a way that energetically it's like you can just vibe in a way that you can't do online. Like you can maybe do through video, but like just a chat, you're not necessarily gonna get that intuitive hit about different people and like ideas, and it can take some time to read between the lines there.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think about in real life spiritual communities I've been in, I kind of come up blank post the church, like truly. I've been hosting some in-person tarot events at my favorite local bookshop, and those are really nice, but it's not a spiritual community yet. It's still growing. It's because of my own health, it's been kind of erratic. And so we're still figuring out who's going to show up. And, every time I'm like, I don't know how many people are going to be there, so I can't really plan anything. And, so it's not really a community yet. It's like an event that's hosted that sometimes people come to. But yeah, I think my only in real life spiritual community are the friends we hang out with that are either fellow business practitioners or work in these same spaces or play around in these same spaces. And we talk about, I have a lot of friends who will text me like, here are the cards I pulled, like, I wanted to share them with you, or I just did this spread of yours and I like, can you believe these cards came up given everything you know about the context of my life? And I love that kind of thing. I think that's really fun. And that's often a doorway to new conversations or explorations. But again, that can be in the realm of friendship. It's a sticky thing for me. I'm not sure that I really have something that I consider an in real life spiritual community right now. It's more groups of friends that share community values and behave as a community, which is the same and also is not the same for everything.
I think that's partly why at the beginning I was like, there's spiritual communities and communities that are also spiritual. And that feels like a very different, that feels like a strong distinction to me with our IRL friends who are also, who for the most part are also practitioners. I think that's also why I don't necessarily get into really deep spiritual conversations. Well, that's a backtrack. I do with my fellow ex-evangelical friends, we will go so hard. Like we will go all in. Like I'm thinking of my bestie, Melissa, who lives in New Hampshire. Shout out to Melissa if she's listening to this. We will go all day, every day about like beliefs and religion, but it's because we share such a similar background, but we don't necessarily talk about animism. You know what I mean? Like I'm not necessarily talking about the new moon with her.
Going back to conflict for just 1 second, because I can't get this out of my brain. I think something about the conflict averse and like if you want to be in a space that has longevity and substance and that relationships really do strengthen when they go through tough times, because even if it's just an opportunity to say, hey, like us, you know, hey, our friendships are really important to this and this project is really important to us. So let's figure this out. I think you just have to be radically honest. It's really important for you, the person who is either upset by the thing or somehow mired in conflict. I think it's important to just be straightforward. And there's a way to be really kind while still saying, hey, I don't think you're a bad person, but this hurt my feelings.
I also just want to say that this shit's hard. Like,
oh my God, it's so hard.
Like, this is learned shit that you don't just like become an expert at overnight, and every conflict is going to be different. And so even if you're like, I'm pretty good at navigating conflict, I've navigated lots of conflicts, every conflict still has to be navigated with care and attention and vulnerability. You have to be willing to say, wow, I fucked up there, or I didn't handle this as well, or I should have said this differently, or I messed up and harmed you. Like I literally caused harm. Maybe I didn't mean to, but I super did. Like if you can't give as well as you can take and you're too afraid of conflict to even want to talk about it, that's a you thing, but there are ways to get better at it. But those things include practice, and you can't be so afraid of the conflict that you avoid all of it, or you actually really can't be in safe community. Like I think that sounds kind of harsh, but I think it's true. I think if you're too afraid to deal with conflict in any way and you want a frictionless community experience, then I don't know what to tell you because I don't think it exists.
It's kind of like that ghosting question, right? Of like, when is it okay to ghost? And it's like, first date, sure, whatever. Like, I don't think it's courteous to not tell someone.
I don't think it's kind.
I don't think it's especially well mannered to get a little Regency England on you. I don't think it's courteous to like not respond to someone who's asking you out again. I think you can say no, but like I don't think it's not egregious. First date,
it's not abusive.
You just met someone, you haven't invested that much. But if you have, say, a friendship of, I don't know, 25 years, and that person just ghosts, that's different. But it gets at what both of you have been saying around, like, if you're committed to someone, if you're committed to a community, committed to a space, you got to be willing to stick it out. And sometimes, of course, you can, like, you leave. Of course. Like, sometimes that there is just a schism and that happens. But, like, everyday stuff, like, dude, you know, you got to, like... And if you aren't, and the thing then becomes like, and this has happened in a handful of relationships I've had over the years, if you can't hunker down together at a certain point, you're just on wildly different pages in life. And it kind of like doesn't matter how long or deep the friendship has been or the relationship has been.
Well, and something we haven't talked about, but I think is a perfect way to kind of lead us out of the conversation is the pain that is involved in the spiritual community experience.
Yeah.
And I think, yes, there's so much joy. Obviously, we've talked about all of those things. I also think there is just a lot of pain. Like if you do find that you've been around someone for so long and then maybe they have a change of belief, or like there have been people that I have followed on Instagram and have been part of their like quote unquote community in terms of like tuning into live readings and doing certain things. And then there's one in particular that I was like, oh, I have confused community with customer. Like, I'm a customer of this person. Oh no, like they're not my community leader. They are a
Yeah.
person who owns a business and they are very good at getting me to purchase things from their business. And so I had to then be like, okay, I can't engage with this content for a second because I have realized that my behaviors are now like there is no exchange, kind of what we were talking about. Like, I'm not in a community, I'm a client of a business. And it's happened in real life as well, you know, like going to moon circles and then going like, oh, I don't know if that's really my vibe, or
Yeah.
going to a shop and overhearing people talking and being like, okay, I don't think these are my people, you know. But it can be hard and really painful to either leave them yourself or to experience people that you are close to leaving them. And I also think, just again, because it's us and it's our beliefs and our values and everything that's really close to the chest, it's like that stuff just hurts a little bit more.
Yeah.
It's really tender.
Yeah.
I don't want to generalize too much here, but I do think there can be a tendency within spiritual communities to overly spiritualize conflict and not address the deeply human and be like, it's a spirit, it's a possession, it's a spell, or whatever, and just not look at the really ugly human underbelly that's underneath those feelings. Like, I will just say it, jealousy is at the root of just about every conflict in in varying communities I'm a part of, like, that I have witnessed over the last few years. It's almost always jealousy. Reasons that friendships between practitioners fall apart, reasons that some people get ostracized. It's like, on occasion, sure, you've got someone who suddenly turns into a turf or like reveals themselves as a, sure, that happens. But like, more often than not, it's just really normal human emotions that are, it's not just that someone's unwilling to be in conflict or with other people, they're not willing to be in conflict with themselves and to look at what's hard, like under the hood. And ultimately, I think that at this point in my life, the people who I'm closest to and have the deepest investments with, and certain, like, this podcast is a business investment, like, that we have with B, like, I really try to be discerning and only get this deep with people who I know look under their own hood. Not to take that metaphor too far, but like,
Yeah, no, that
who
works.
are doing the fucking hard work of being a person in relationship with other people and who aren't just like glamorizing or glossing over shit.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I think that that willingness to sit in the hard stuff, to acknowledge messy, painful feelings, to acknowledge our own flaws, to acknowledge contradictions maybe in behavior, like I think there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, but also like it is very hard to be a person in this world right now, and lots of us have values that we know we believe in, and also then have to make choices that contradict those values. And some of those things are unavoidable, and some of them are not, or some of them can be there's the worst option, there's the not so quite shitty option, and we're all just trying to do our best here. But I think there are people who are willing to acknowledge that and sit in that and sit in the discomfort and contradiction of that. And then there are other people that are like, no, I will fight to the death for my right to have my Starbucks coffee or something. And you're like, okay,
Dude,
sure.
like,
If that's the hill you want to die on,
again,
die on that hill.
unless
Good luck.
Starbucks
Like,
is the only coffee shop in your rural town. Again, I have space for Amazon stuff. Like, with
yeah.
really, like, I grew up really rural. I have space for Amazon and like for different kinds of people who need different kinds of things. I have a lot of space for that. If you live in New York City, you do not need Starbucks. Dear God. Like, sorry, I'm just now
If you are in Cedar Sinai Hospital for 36 days and the only thing available to you is Starbucks.
But that's real. That happened to us.
Yes.
Like, I still have Starbucks gift cards left over from when Gina was in the hospital because that was the closest food option for me to get stuff. And I didn't like it. I don't like the coffee and I don't like the food, but it was the thing that we had. So people were sending us gift cards. I still got them because we don't spend them anywhere else. But like, it kept me alive, and it was a huge, huge gift from our community that we literally had to ask for because it was the most accessible thing. So I have space for it. But like, I don't even know where I started with this, but But yeah, I think every time we talk about the numbers 5 and 7, that's like so loud in my brain right now, it's like, are you willing to be in the messy middle with yourself and with other people? Are you willing to shift direction? Do you know what your values are? And are you willing to acknowledge that sometimes the things that you believe about yourself to be true might not look that way to people that are observing your behavior or impacted by your behavior? And then yeah, like what's underneath it? What's driving your choices and what does that look like and how is that influencing your impact on the world and also the relationships that you're forming with other people, because we're all observing each other at the end of the day. And like, yeah, most of us are very focused on ourselves. That's just human nature. But it's weird to pretend that the things that we care about and the things that we do aren't going to impact other people. And that is for better and for worse. And that's, again, just a huge part of being in community. That's kind of the whole deal.
No, I
Yeah.
love that, Meg. I think, and thank you for bringing up numbers because I was like, oh yeah, I had planets I wanted to just briefly mention.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, cool.
Because I think that it's easy for folks to be like, oh, community building, boundaries, rules, guidelines, da 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 da, Saturn, and like, sure, but Jupiter is really who I look at in part because Jupiter is that planet of belief and of connection and expansion and like global network kind of stuff, and also has its joy in the 11th house, which is the house of community, volunteering, friendships, large friendship groups, that kind of thing. So Jupiter has so much to do with how the beliefs we have and how we see ourselves having those beliefs connect us with other people. And so yeah, also looking at Jupiter, I think, either in your own chart or in other people's, is like really useful.
I'm Jupiter ruled, and I have my Libra moon in the 11th. And that just makes me think about how emotionally slutty I am. And that's why I have such good online community.
Emotional sluts for Jupiter.
Emotional sluts for Jupiter.
I just really feel that that's how it manifests. Like my
Title of the
emotional
episode:
sluttiness.
Building spiritual community as an emotional slut.
How to have boundaries with a big slut for feelings. Yeah.
Yeah. I did write down a little bit of practical advice for this.
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Like practical, magical advice. Given the question around like, how to be building it, which involves a lot of navigating like vulnerability, intimacy. But that's just to say I do have a spell to recommend, which is not even so much a spell as it is a spell, but it's not a ritual. It is a ritual.
What is it, babe?
It's a sweetening jar, which here in the US, this is a tradition that really comes out of hoodoo, and a lot of people have different, is hoodoo a closed practice or not? That's a whole question that as a white woman, I have no business with. I do know that I have been taught by some of my own teachers about certain practices that have overlap with hoodoo, such as sweetening jars, honey jars, or sugar jars. And it's not just that you can sweeten other people or concepts or relationships to you, like to bring in more like-hearted spiritual friends, but you can also sweeten yourself. And that's especially what I like doing these sometimes for, is like doing a sugar jar is going to work faster than a honey jar. Honey jar is slow. It's like long-term magic. Sugar jar is more instant results, quick results, I should say. But it very much can be like you sweetening yourself to be attracted to the right people, to like-hearted, like intentioned, like valued folk. It can be just a really also sweet, like very Venusian ritual to, like bring more love, joy, connection into your world.
I love that. And yeah, I think I probably have some tarot spreads that I can drop in the show notes, honestly. But yeah, I'm really just thinking about like as journal prompts or as reflection questions, like what are you looking for in community? If you feel like you are lacking spiritual community or more broadly just lacking community in general, where are you feeling that lack? What do you have to offer to community? What do you have to bring? What are your gifts? What are your skills? What are your resources? What could you bring to the space? And also, what are you looking to receive? What do you want to get out of community? And what does that look like? I think that literally just starting there, if you're trying to build community or you want to be in deeper community with people that you're getting to know, can be a really helpful place to start with reflection, because so often it is really framed as I want something, I want community because XYZ. And I think teasing that out and spending time really thinking about what lives underneath that, what's driving that, what's motivating that, is going to help you with that long-term effort when the conflict inevitably hits. Like, why am I still doing this? Why am I devoted to this? Why is this community practice so important to me? What is the foundation of this that I can keep returning to and remembering that this is worth the effort, that this is worth the vulnerability, that this is worth the contradiction or pain that might show up as a result of navigating conflict. Like, what are the benefits, and why am I doing this? Why does it matter?
Yeah, I guess my practical advice was around where to find these spaces. But really quick, Meg, you said something about lack, like where do you feel like you're lacking in community? And the first thing that I thought of is that if you're listening to this and you can think about a community or a spiritual community that you are already in, obviously if it's one of our discords, yay, but if it's not, that's fine too. Think about the existing community and what it would look like to invest even further. And that's a word that all three of us have used throughout this conversation, is investment, because it is a give and take, and it does take time to build things that are going to last and that are strong and sturdy and that can weather conflict. And so think about the ways in which you could further invest in the communities that you're already a part of. But then, yeah, taking Meg's journaling questions and then just thinking about where could those communities exist. There are so many online options there. I guess you pick your preferred practitioner or facilitator, like somebody that you vibe with, that you think that they have shared their spiritual framework and it matches enough of yours to want to be a part of what they've got going on or to know the people that they want to know. And then in real life, I mean, there's tons of ways this can look. This can look like finding some kind of structured space, whether it's a church, whether it's a meditation center, whether it's a research society. We were going back to the, academia, like where are the adjacent spaces that could be spiritual? Yeah, who's leading moon circles where you are, if that's part of your practice and that's important to you. I think there are tons of options for spiritual community, and it really, it does take time, and it takes a certain amount of courage and bravery to say, I'm going to show up in here and I'm going to be seen and I'm going to see others. And I feel like probably a lot of the issues around building community are just rooted in fear. And even jealousy, like you talked about, is like fear that you're not enough or that you're not good enough to do something, or comparison. So I'm just sending a lot of like love and support and bolstering to everyone who's looking to make investments into community, because it's hard. It's hard to show up and be like, oh, hey.
I love that. I have to add to what both of you said, the astrology that today we're, but what are we right now? Like an hour away, like less than an hour away from the new moon in Taurus. And the thing about the astrology of today, like I love how much you both have like talked about, like it takes time. It it's slow. It takes a minute.
Like any relationship.
Like any relationship, but also like that's also like the Taurus season that we're in right now. That's also that energy. Like I wrote about it today too. I was like, because so many folks, when you see new moon in Taurus, they're like, oh my God, abundance. Let's get abundance. And it's like, this is the planting of the abundance, guys. This is the start. That's not gonna come until later. Like that plant needs 6 months underground before it starts to like root or something. So I don't know. There's just something I think really beautiful around like the very literally patient astrology that we are also having this conversation in this moment, that's kind of beautifully synchronistic with the themes that we're landing on here at the end.
Yeah, happy new moon in Taurus.
Happy new moon. Yeah.
Except not to anybody who's listening to this in the
Yeah.
middle of May. Well, this has been juicy. Any last thoughts or things you feel like we didn't talk about?
Yeah, were there parts of the question we didn't get to that y'all were hungry
I
for?
think we really covered it. Man, I wrote down stuff about like fucking witch trials. So what do I know? Like I'm reading a book about the 17th century witch trials in northern Norway right now. So like that's why it was being in community, the difficulty of being in like, but yeah.
I need to know that book. I would like to read.
It's called it's historical fiction, but it's based on true events that did happen because I went and looked it up and like read about it. And it's called The Mercies by Kieran Millwood Hargrave. It was a 2020 book, so I'm not surprised that I missed it, unfortunately. But it's so good. It's also very sapphic. So
Which we love.
yeah, we love.
We
Unlike
love.
witch trials, sapphic, a community where all the men die. Say less.
But literally, you're like, hey, I came prepared to talk about how spiritual community is not safe to be in, okay? They will burn you.
Hell of a minute to end on, man.
No, but we, all jokes aside, all three of us really appreciated this question. And I think the journey that we went on to even getting to this record is actually beautiful spiritual community at work, because we all, regardless of our initial reactions, took time to reflect and do the under the hood work, and then we came back to it. And it really was about, for us, saying, well, let's not just toss this to the side. Like, this was something that a member of our community, of our coven, wanted to know more about. And so that shared value, I think, brought us, and the relationship brought us back into the work of saying, like, no, this is actually worthy of taking the time and sitting with our own discomfort in order to have it out. So
this was so nourishing at the end of the day. And I think that's also that's just the under the hood work. It's like you gotta sit with it and get past the initial reaction and be like, is this a me problem? Because usually, at least in my case, it's a me problem. So
but I do think that there's so much value in being like, what in this is the restriction, like what feels uncomfortable, what's coming up immediately, what's underneath that, like where is that living, what's motivating that, what am I really ultimately afraid of? And that shit's uncomfortable to sit with, but that's part of why it's so important, is because being willing to look at that shit is what makes it easier to navigate hard things in community, and also ask for what you need in community, or articulate and understand what you want from community.
Yeah, and maybe you find yourself in a place where you're like, okay, I actually need to leave this community. Yeah, trusting your gut and trusting the writing on the wall, like when something is no longer a good fit, is very valid, and it's all in the soup of community building, and just while everyone's thinking about what they want out of a community, some communities aren't meant to last forever, and so if something starts to feel off, or spiritual communities come out with new rules that you don't want to follow, I think there's a way to leave a space that doesn't put a bad taste in people's mouths. And again, it just comes back to like honesty and vulnerability, and being willing to say somewhat straightforwardly, like, hey, this doesn't vibe with me anymore, but I really honor and cherish the relationships that we've all built, and like, how can we do that outside of the community that we met in?
I think it's that it's messy. Like, I think that communities are often evolving in different ways and are finding their footing, or are going to take up shape in different ways the longer that they exist. And sometimes you can hang with that, and sometimes it shifts into something that you're like, this actually doesn't align with my values anymore, or this doesn't feel like a place where I can really be who I want to be able to be. And that's also real. Like, but when you start out doing that hard work of like, who am I? What do I value? What do I want out of this space? It makes it a little easier, not easy, but easier to say, oh, okay, this actually isn't aligning with what I want, and doesn't feel like a space that I can be safe in anymore.
Well, I'm so glad we weathered our conflicts
Me
and have had this conversation today.
Yeah. I love y'all. Like,
so much.
It's just good. I don't know. But that's the thing too, is at the end of the day, I think conflict makes the vast majority of relationships and communities much stronger. Like y'all were saying, like you find, you really get to see people's true colors in conflict, and then be like, oh, this is still someone I want to hang with. And that's a really special and beautiful thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think so much trust is established through the navigation of conflict when it's done in a respectful way. And when you're able to kind of come out the other side and say, wow, I feel even closer to you now. Or like, I actually trust that now I know that we can do this. And the things that matter to us, the things that matter to me that you've said matter to you also really do matter to you. And we can get through this together. Like, whenever I've been able to navigate a conflict with a friend or someone that I'm doing business collaborations with or anything, we always come out stronger on the other side. And it always feels like, okay, this is now better than it was before. Not because conflict is fun, but because we've shown that we care about each other enough to both go through it.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thanks for this question.
Yeah,
And
so much.
Thank you so much.
yeah, and we don't have one for June, so hit us up.
We have a
We
list
have a
of
big list.
topics. We have a long list of topics.
You're right. You're right. You're right. We should not solicit more. We are good.
I know in general, feel free to suggest things. We do have a long list already. So
You're right,
if you
you're right,
want to
you're
add
right.
to our list, please feel free to drop something in the comments or
This is
email
where
us.
being Jupiter ruled is not good. You're like, more.
Jupiter and Mercury. I'm like Saturn. No. We have a queue that we are working through right now.
You're right. You're right. Well, that's the difference between someone who finishes their reading list and someone whose TBR is just oodles.
I don't have a
Miles
TBR.
long.
I have books around my house, and I have things I'm like, oh, I should read that someday.
Yeah, I buy books to collect them, and because I'm like, oh, I might want to read that at some point, and so I can just shop my my
Yes.
bookshelves, or I can go back to the bookstore.
Or we go back to the bookstore.
Always.
It's also a great place to find community, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Bookstores.
Bookstores and libraries.
Okay, well, everyone have a beautiful rest of May, all of our sweet little goblins, and we'll see you on the next one.
Yeah, love y'all.
Thanks so much.